Hey everybody, PatBenage here, the evolution coach, creator of the 6-Week Shift, the Inner Path, and author of this inspirational blog, SoulTalk. And last week, I think it was last week, sometimes time just kind of loses itself. And but I talked about 3 questions that I think really get you to not just to the heart of anything, any experience in your life, but also will give you the direction, the impetus, the momentum to move forward in a direction that is in alignment with your truth. There are 3 questions that allow you to get to your truth and to understand what that means in the moment. Whatever's happening, whatever's showing up for you, you can always go back to these questions and essentially, with a little practice, you tap into that inner wisdom, and you just know what to do, what the next step is, and it gives you that. I think it gives you that confidence to step into it, to step into that experience, and recognize that all is well. So the first question is one that, I've talked a lot about over the last few years. It's, who am I? And so like I said, I've talked a lot about this subject, about who we are and that sort of thing. But the importance with this question is your view of who you are. When you ask it of yourself, you're asking in that moment, who are you in your grandest vision of that? Some people like what are you more than who are you, but I want this to identify you as that. I want this question to begin that process of identifying you as that idea, that vision. And so ask that question, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of depth about the answer to that question, because that's your answer. You have to go with what you view, honestly, what you view, what you see, how you see your true self. The second question is, where are you? Where am I? And this one can get a little complicated. It can get a little bit confusing about what that means, because you can take that in so many different ways. And so you can look at, where am I in terms of, and I think I mentioned this before, in terms of the evolutionary scale, where am I compared to what I see as my true self? I mean, how am I being in this moment? And the question is always about where you are right now. Right now, as you're asking the question. And sometimes the question itself changes that. So be careful about that. But ask from that perspective. Where am I? In relationship to what's showing up, where am I? Because sometimes we encounter things that trigger us to sort of drop into a lower self. And so asking that question, who am I, and then where am I in this moment, in relative to what's showing up, is critical to understand how you move forward out of that. So, but where am I can also be you know, if it's relative to something, you know, that you're sometimes we experience, a lot of times we experience things as in terms of what we don't have, what we're missing. And we get into this mode of wanting that. And so if you're in that place and you're asking, who am I, and then where am I, then it's, where am I in relationship to this desire? And sometimes we can get that as a, you know, a time factor. Sometimes we can get that as a distance factor, you know, relative space and time. and that's, you know, those are all valid, you know, valid perspectives, and they're all valid things to look at around that question, where am I? And I encourage you, the more complicated, you know, the subject matter is that you're asking about, I encourage you to look at all aspects of that question, where am I? You know, you know, sometimes it's a very simple thing. Sometimes it's very simple. You know, if you have a desire to be you know, in a place where you're financially secure, in other words, you have enough income coming in that you're taking care of everything and you're okay consistently, you can look at it in terms of, okay, well, where am I in terms of that? How much money do I have coming in? How much money do I have in the bank? You know, where am I in relationship to what I believe that I need in order to be that financial secure? And so you can look at it from that perspective, and that's pretty simple. But it could be, you know, where am I in relationship to a relationship? You know, maybe you're single and you'd like to be in a relationship and you're having difficulty finding the right person or whatever. And so where are you in relationship to that? That gets a little more complicated, but again, it's a question that begins, and what I encourage is that in those situations, maybe you need to go through this process multiple times. Don't allow yourself to get stuck in this question. Answer what comes to you at the moment. You know, if you are first asking the question, who am I? That immediately draws your attention into that higher self, that inner wisdom. Because you're imagining yourself as this higher self, this grander vision of who you are. And so it immediately connects with that, taps into that. And so that's why I always ask that question first. And then where am I? If you ask that, then the key with all of this is don't get caught up in all of the aspects of that where. Ask it one piece at a time. You know, your soul knows what you're thinking. And so you don't have to, you know, start describing it into your mind, because your mind will do that. Your mind will, you know, begin to describe in detail what you're talking about in terms of where you are and what you're asking in terms of, but your soul knows. So ask it, let the thought come in, and then sit and listen. Sit and listen. See what comes through. See what comes through. Sometimes and I utilize this quite a bit with clients. Sometimes it's really powerful to ask that question, and if you have difficulty with the mind kind of wandering, just start writing. Write down what comes through, and I think you'll tap into that source really quickly. So that's a critical factor in getting to the answer to that question. Sit and listen. Start writing, because that writing will draw it out of you as well. And it's a means to sort of bypass the mind. And then finally, the third question is, what do I want? So relative to this question of where am I and who am I, relative to what is showing up and what the subject is that you're asking about in the first place, what do I want? And I think that it's, at least my experience is, that becomes clear, pretty quickly if you've gone through this process. If you've gone through this process, then your focus is no longer on this subject, this experience, this whatever is showing up. It's you've brought that attention internally to the inner self, and now you begin to speak from there. You begin to see from there, and so it becomes much clearer what it is that you actually want relative to what is showing up. And like I said, the challenging part is the where question. That's the part that's going to take the most time in this. And it's critical to allow yourself the time to go through that, to assess, honestly, really honestly, where are you relative to this? And ultimately, you're looking at where you are consciously, in consciousness, relative to that, in relationship to that. So is this experience, is this circumstance bringing you into a level that is below where you normally are? Is it drawing you down? Is it drawing you up? Is it drawing you into fear, love? What is happening? And like I said, just allow that inner voice to communicate this to you. And then the what do I want will be an easy answer. It might take time before you again practice this. So it might take some time before it becomes easy. But the more you do this, the more clear you become about everything. And I know for me, it's a profound leap. It's a big step upward in my own process, just to be conscious, just to become conscious of these questions, to ask them in a conscious manner, with awareness, with purpose. So again, as always, thanks so much for joining me today. And it's really an honor just to have the opportunity to share this wisdom that comes through. And so thank you very much. And remember, again, live life from the inside out. See you next week.